we'll turn it over to Joan Biebelhausen and Bob Schoeneman from Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much for hosting this program. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all of the opportunities we've had to work with you. Our topic today is about lawyer well-being, and we're going to talk about stigma, and we're going to talk about the times that we're in. My name is Joan Biebelhausen, and I'm the Executive Director at Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. Been here for going on 16 years, and it still seems like a new job every day. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my colleague, Bob Schoeneman, who will introduce himself as we move to our first topic slide. Bob?
Good afternoon, everyone. I can't even express how grateful I am for the opportunity to be here with you today. I am the Outreach Coordinator with Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. I've been in that role for just over a year. And again, I'm very excited to be here.
All right. Well, here's what we're going to talk about today. We have an empty road, which often, if any of you are going to your offices, may be what you see a lot of the time. I know that's been the case for me. We have a small office, and we've had most days one person, but one person only in the office. So as we are working through some very difficult times, and we've got a number of things that are triggering us in different ways. We've got a worldwide pandemic. We've got the killing of George Floyd in our state. So everybody now knows where Minneapolis is. And I know that you may not be in Minneapolis, but everybody knows where it is. We've got the election, and we've got the aftermath. All of this is triggering us in different ways, and all of it involves the legal profession. So we're paying attention because we're interested in the topics. We're paying attention because we may be things with this. So as we're in these difficult times, what is normal for us? And when should we be concerned? When is it that, okay, that's not the times, there's more to it, and I really need to pay attention. What can I do? And why does stigma keep us from doing that? So not only are we going to talk about issues, but we're also going to talk about some strategies for reducing the stigma so that you can get yourself through this more effectively. All right. So as we move forward, it's important to recognize that the entire profession is feeling this. The lawyers, the judges, but also all the people who work with us. And there's a way that we think we can describe how to frame this program. And this is the pillars of well-being that come from a report called the Path to Lawyer Wellbeing, Practical Recommendations for Positive Change. And what they did is they came up with 6 different areas where we need to pay attention in order to be able to do our best work. And of course, as lawyers, we pay the most attention to those pillars which are intellectual and occupational, because that's what we need in order to be able to work effectively. But if we don't have the other things present, if we don't have that foundation, emotional, social, physical, and spiritual, are we going to be able to do our best thinking? And then over that, we put the filter of culture. And this is something, it doesn't matter whether it's a rural urban, it doesn't matter if it's race or gender, it doesn't matter what it is. The culture we grew up in, the culture we live in now, the culture that informs our decisions overlays all of this. And we filter through it when we think about whether it's okay to take care of ourselves, when we make decisions and judgments about others. And so all of these things we need to be aware of in order to not only do our best work, but also take care of ourselves so that we're less at risk for some of the challenges that we're going to talk about. I mentioned the name of the report this came from. It was put out by the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing. And this resource, which it has 44 different recommendations for 7 groups of stakeholders. There's a lot of really good stuff in there, and we encourage people to use it. It came out of 2 other reports that were published earlier that discussed substance use and mental health issues among lawyers, and then also among law students. And these are cites to those articles if you are interested in those. And just this last December, a similar level study was released about judges. And so there's those 3 parts of our profession, lawyers, judges, and law students. We now have research on the impact of stress, what sorts of things are most stressful, and what are some of the things that are most helpful? So the task force identified 3 reasons to act now. Our organizations do better if we are supporting people in doing their best thinking. One of a general counsel for a company talked about saying to the lawyers or the law firms that want to do work for them, we want your best thinking, not your burned out thinking. We are supporting lawyers doing work so that I can do my best. And that's the kinds of things that are coming out of this, that these sorts of requests are being made. This is an ethics issue. Are you more competent when you're taking care of yourself? Absolutely. And you can think more clearly. So it really goes directly to the very first rule in our ethics code. And it also affects our diligence, and it can have an impact on somebody supervising somebody. If you are aware that there might be a problem, you don't do anything, you actually might be held responsible. And it's the right thing to do. So I just want to repeat the request that you be muted, because sometimes noises do come through. I know I'm very static. I am hearing that static, but I'm going to continue. So what is normal? Right now we are feeling this range of emotions. We're having the impact of all of these things that are going on. And of course we're more stressed, or we're stressed in different ways, and that comes with it. If you have a big event in your life, even if it's a good one, like you're getting married, or you have a child graduating from school, or you're having a baby, you're going to have stresses around those too. And so, yes, this is normal when these things happen for someone to have these kinds of stresses. So right now what we're in the middle of is you might be working at home, you might have children where either you're concerned about them going to school or they're not going to school. You are connected electronically and yet you don't really feel connected. We'll talk about those connections a little bit later. If you're going into your office and you're hearing all these things about baking sourdough bread, well, you even haven't had the time to look up how to spell it. And so there's that kind of impact as well. And then I want to acknowledge that we're experiencing grief. And that may be because you've lost someone. It may be because someone dear to you or someone in your network or circle is ill. A way too large segment of our population has experienced this grief. And I would note that we will talk about LCL later, but we provide counseling on any issue that causes stress or distress, and that can include grief. For all of us, however, we are looking at anticipatory grief and absolute grief, what we might have, our opportunities that we no longer have, etc. And so that is another thing that's affecting us. It's reasonable to know that our emotions will vacillate. We're not going to be perfect. We're doing the best that we can under the circumstances. Can we be okay with, I'm doing the best that I can? So when we look at these well-being components, and you can add that overlay of culture, where are you struggling? And I want you to think about that. Where are you struggling? Where are you feeling most challenged? Where is your foundation shaky? And I want you to think about how you can give more attention to that. If you sprain your ankle, you're going to use the RICE method, you know? You're going to elevate, you're going to use ice, those kinds of things. You're not going to walk on it, all right? So if there's an area where you are struggling in your well-being, give it some extra attention, give it some extra TLC. But then as lawyers, we always look for, okay, where is it bad? Where am I struggling? We can get to that. Let's take a look at where we're doing well. Let's take a look at where we are saying, you know, I've kind of got this. I heard about 4 different people last week who are having trouble getting into their dress pants, and I can get into my dress pants. That's a good thing. So physically, I must be doing something right. Well, maybe I can do more of that to support these other aspects of my well-being. So not only look at where you might be challenged, because lawyers look for the worst that could happen. That's why we get paid. But also look at what you're doing well. We don't give that the emphasis it should have. What am I doing well, and how can I use that to better support what's happening with me? As we move forward, Bob, it's reasonable to also recognize that we're going to be experiencing stress and we're going to be experiencing fear. And if you have, we're going to talk about trauma a little bit later, but not a lot in this presentation because it's kind of an overview. But the fear can come from a feeling that you once had when something happened, and you're afraid that it's going to happen again. And so we don't have control. Where it's unpredictable. We don't know how big. We don't know how long. And we make rash decisions based on that stigma. That I have to do this right now. I have to do it the way I've always done it. I don't understand that, so I'm not even going to look at it. And that's when we make biased decisions. And that fear can help us cope. Gina Cho, who is one of the co-authors of a book called The Anxious Lawyer, talks about how when she used to have this anxious moment, she would become paralyzed. But now she recognizes that as something that is warning her that there is something to pay attention to. And that's what anxiety can do for you. So we may feel more stressed and burned out with what's happening right now. We might feel more exhausted. We might feel overwhelmed or powerless. And that can come from current events. When should we be concerned? Well, here are some things that might happen that are happening more than they used to, or you're finding that you can't kind of get out of it. You might be feeling panicked quite a bit. You might have a reaction that's an 8 out of 10 when the situation is a 3 out of 10. You might find yourself preoccupied to the detriment of being able to complete other things, and that gets into diligence, and that gets into neglect and communication for ethical concerns. We might be impatient and be acting out, and we may be impacted by things that are traumatic to us. When we talk about trauma, this is the individual, unique experience that each of us has that nobody else exactly shares. As we're going through these times, people will say, same storm, different boats. And I think that applies to so many different things. You know, somebody might be in a canoe and somebody else might be in an ocean liner. And most of us are somewhere in between. And so how do we integrate the experience? And sometimes we can't because it's so overwhelming. And it can have lasting effects on every aspect of our well-being. Well, these are traumatic times, and that trauma might be something you experienced yourself, or it may be something that you experienced earlier in your life that is now triggered by something you are seeing or hearing about. Often what our profession sees is direct and secondary and vicarious trauma, which is where we are affected by what has happened to somebody else. And that is what is most common in us, but it's not all there are. It is. So now we ask, are we getting the help we need? Are we asking for the help we need? Do we know what to ask for? And so when we were first developing this program, we started looking at something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you may remember from high school or college, you know, Psych 101. And now Bob will introduce himself a little bit more in a bit. He'll talk about his marketing background. And this is something that the marketers used, which was to say, you really need this thing so that you can be self-actualized, okay? And so it was turned into this pyramid, which is what we've always seen as related to this. But what I would suggest is, and there's newer research about this, is that it isn't about you have to satisfy your health and safety first in order to be able to attend to what you might see as your well-being, but rather going back to that foundation, that if you are not paying attention to all of those pillars of well-being, then even meeting those basic needs are going to be challenged. So really, it's more a matter of having the support in place to meet those basic needs. So it's almost as if the top of the pyramid is underneath supporting what looks like the bottom of the pyramid. That no, you don't need to wait until the health and safety stuff is met in order to be able to do better. And this is the kind of thing that's been keeping people from getting help, which is that, well, it's either not bad enough or I have to deal with this other stuff first. And in fact, for healthy minds, it's integrated, okay? And so if you found that it's not time yet, and yet you're stressed, maybe that's going to be helpful in saying, you know, I think I could do something. I think I could talk to somebody. I just need to work through this particular situation. It doesn't have to be a crisis. You can talk to somebody. LCL offers free counseling just because you'd like to talk to somebody and work through something. So I'm going to turn this over to Bob now, who's going to talk about integrate these concepts in with the kinds of stronger challenges we might have, and help us understand the place of stigma in our world and in our decisions and in the work we do as lawyers.
Thank you, Joan. Joan mentioned that I have a background in marketing. So that slide of Maslow's, I really like that as a marketer because it has lots of bright colors, and it really draws my attention, and it's kind of shiny. I want to talk with you today about stigma, and it's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. We're going to, as a jumping off point, we're going to look at one of the general recommendations that came out of that report from the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing, and that is to facilitate, destigmatize, and encourage help-seeking behaviors. And I want to highlight here that this third bullet point on the slide, that research shows that the most effective way to reduce stigma is through direct contact with someone who has personally experienced a relevant disorder. In today's COVID pandemic age, this is the closest we're going to get to direct contact, and we're going to make it work. I am a person in long-term recovery. On March 9th this year, so in a few weeks, it will have been 8 years since my last drink. And it doesn't get any easier as time goes on. I can tell you what it feels like to suffer stigma as an alcoholic or as someone in recovery. In addition to being a person in long-term recovery, I'm also someone who has suffered or struggled his entire adult life with major depression. I have a major depressive disorder that has been incredibly disruptive in my life. Some of my depressive episodes have lasted literally years. I'm kind of at the tail end of one now that's been going on for coming on 3 years. I hope I'm at the tail end. It's really hard to tell, but you know, I get a lot of support, not only through LCL, but through my medical team. And there's a stigma that's associated with that. I spoke to a group of lawyers a couple of months ago, and one of the questions I got in the chat was, well, was there any fear that you had about talking about, you know, depression or being an alcoholic and being a lawyer? And quite honestly, the answer to that question is not, since I'm not practicing anymore. It was terrifying to think that someone might learn about the depression while I was practicing. That I couldn't have shared that with anyone prior to my stopping practicing. The alcoholism, yeah, that I was comfortable sharing that because I actually got sober in law school. I went to law school late. I just graduated 3 years ago. I only practiced a couple of years. But during that couple of years that I practiced, I was a solo. And also, you know, I mentioned that, okay, I've been licensed for 4 years now. And if I just graduated in 2016 and I've been suffering from this major depressive episode for at least 3 years, there's an overlap there. And how did that affect my ability to practice? Well, I was a solo. I was practicing as a solo attorney, Most of my clients were business clients because I have a business background. And I was all alone. I had no support staff. I had nobody. And the stress got to me, and it piled on and piled on. And stress, you'll hear me say many times, is both a cause and a consequence. Isolation is both a cause and a consequence of substance use disorder and mental illnesses. And it clearly had an effect on me, to the point that on April 14th of 2019, I survived a suicide attempt. That was the point that my major depression came bubbling up. As much as I had tried to hide it, I couldn't hide it any longer. There it was. And I've been dealing with the effects of that since. I lost my business, my law firm. I had to stop practicing because I couldn't work for 8 months. And it's been, I still am trying to rebuild my life from that. How much better would I be? What better place would I be in right now if I had known that LCL had these resources that I could take advantage of, and it would be without judgment, and I could get a helping hand. And maybe this could have happened. Maybe I could have addressed these issues before they became so super critical that I nearly died as a result of them. That's why I get so passionate about stigma and trying to shine a light on stigma and say, hey, this is what is stopping lawyers from seeking the help they need. The ABA Hazelden study from 2016, one of the findings was that lawyers don't want other people to find out they need help. We're the superhuman people that, we're emotionally detached. We solve other people's problems. We don't have problems of our own, because if people saw that we're struggling with our own problems, how would they ever trust us with theirs? And there's also big concerns regarding privacy and confidentiality. I didn't know this a few years ago, but LCL in Minnesota has the strongest privacy and confidentiality policy of any lawyer assistance program in the nation. We don't share information with anyone, even with the client's permission. We won't tell anybody anything. It's incredibly strong. The bottom line here is that stigma prevents people from getting the help they need. And because of that, it delays people getting the help they need, and it makes their problems worse. These types of problems don't go away by themselves, and they're best addressed when they're still kind of small. But if stigma makes us wait, and ultimately it's a diversity and inclusion issue. And something I want to help you understand is that stigma is not just something that it's not just a scarlet letter like Hester Prynne wore in The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's more than that. It's see, we have this tendency as people to internalize what we think other people think about us. So when we start feeling the stigma that other people, that feeling of disgrace or fear that other people will reject us, we start to internalize that, and it becomes an intense, visceral feeling of shame and isolation. And again, isolation is a cause and a consequence of mental illness. Makes it worse. Education can help with the public stigma. I can talk until I'm blue in the face to lawyers statewide about stigma and how it impacted me, and that I believe that, and I'm passionate about the idea that that will help us reduce public stigma. I can't do anything. I can't put a dent in personal stigma because that's the part where we've internalized it and it becomes part of our self-image, and our self-esteem gets tagged to it. And we actually start to buy into the idea that we are somehow less than everyone else. And we lose sight of the fact that everybody has problems. Maybe not the same problems, but everybody has problems. And it's how we deal with those problems that can define us. We lose sight of that, and we just overly identify with our problem. So where does stigma come from? Stigma comes from, I'm going to ask everybody to please make sure that your microphones are on mute because we're getting some funky sounds. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption. Stigma comes from how we think about people, the words we use. Words are incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. When I was teaching a college course many years ago, I trying to make this point. I pointed out to my students that a hymn and a song, those are synonyms. Okay, they mean in certain circumstances essentially the same thing, but they're not interchangeable. Okay, a song by Eminem is very different than a hymn by Eminem. That almost sounds weird that Eminem came out with a hymn. It just sounds different. The words we choose to use formulate how other people think about an issue. We know that when we're preparing for litigation. We don't refer to our defendant as the defendant or the accused. We refer to them in humanizing terms, rather than something that would reinforce an idea that that they may possibly be guilty. Many of us have had the experience either of having broken a limb or worked or went to school with someone who broke a limb, and that person comes back with their cast on, and everybody wants to hear the story. What happened? How's the tree? You know, it's a skiing accident. Did you hurt the tree or any of that? You know, lots of jokes, lots of levity. You know, people are happy to see the injured person, glad that they're doing all right, sign in the cast. The first day back to work from treatment, or from you know, from having to take some time off due to you know, mental health. Nobody wants to talk to you. Nobody wants to talk to you. Nobody wants to ask how it's going. There are no get well cards, and nobody rushes up to ask to you know, to hear your story about how you broke your brain. Nobody wants to hear it. And there's this feeling of, you know, yeah, shame is there, but ultimately it kind of gets distilled down to hopelessness. We just start to believe that it's never going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And there is no hope for us. So there are certain mental health challenges that we as a legal profession are faced with. This is not an exclusive list. There are more challenges, there's more mental health issues that we deal with, but these are the big ones. All right, I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. I know that for time, I think I'm probably running a little longer than I ought to be. This lawyer study in 2016 looked not only at substance use, but also looked at mental health. And that study found that 28% of lawyers who responded during the last 12 months, because that's how long back the measurement instrument looks, during the preceding 12 months, 28% had shown signs of depression of varying degrees. 28%. All right. That's about 6 times higher than the incidence rate in the general population. 6 times, because the depression is roughly 4.5%. And this is pre-pandemic. okay? The pandemic has made these issues worse. We're more isolated as a result of the pandemic, and isolation is both the cause and a consequence of substance use disorder and mental health issues. 28% of lawyers suffer from some type of depression in the last 12 months. 19% some form of severe anxiety, again, in the preceding 12 months. That's 1 in 5 lawyers, 1 in 5 with severe anxiety. Again, that's like six times, because the incidence rate of anxiety in the general population is 3.5 to 4%. So actually it's maybe four times, 4 to 5 times for severe anxiety. That's a lot. You know, 1 in 4 with depression, 1 in 5 with severe anxiety, 11.5 had suicidal ideations at some point during their career. 11.5%. That's 1 in 9 roughly. That's a lot. It's a lot of people in our industry that is suffering. Graphically, we can look at this lawyer study, and we can see, you know, that you see that white cylinder down there, the incidence rate of within the general U.S. population of adults who are exhibiting problematic drinking, which is hazardous or possible dependence. Essentially, it's drinking more than the doctors want them to drink. That's a good way to think about it. 6.4% of the general population. For attorneys, it's 21%, 3 times the rate, 21%. 1 in 5 of us are drinking at levels that our doctors are concerned about. And the doctors themselves, it's roughly 1 in 10. So, you know, they're at 10, 11%, we're at 21%. For attorneys under 30 years old or practicing less than 10 years, it's 32%, or roughly 1 in 3 new lawyers. Those are shocking. Those are shocking numbers. Looking at anxiety, persistent anxiety threatens our ability to cope. Anxiety is kind of future oriented, all right? We don't get anxious about stuff that has happened. We're not anxious about stuff that is happening right now. It's future oriented. We're worried about something that's going to happen or not happen 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, 20 minutes from now. And when we become preoccupied with that, we become unable to complete regular tasks in the present moment. We're pulling all of this worry and all of this stress from the future to the present moment. That's what anxiety is. It's getting all wound up in a tight ball about stuff that may or may not happen in the future. And it prevents us from doing our best work right now. Depression is defined as changes in normally pleasurable activities. I've already mentioned to you that depression and I are old friends, or at least traveling companions. Depression comes with it. You know, depression presents differently with different people. And my own experience of depression is that it starts out as kind of a feeling of hollowness and emptiness. And it proceeds through other stages to a point where I suffer from incredible inertia and paralysis. Just this overwhelming sense of dread and inability to do anything. When I'm in the worst of it, I can sleep for 20 hours straight, and get up and really have to go to the bathroom. But yeah, 20 hours straight. Be up for 4 hours and be exhausted the whole time and go back to bed. It's as you can imagine, I can't get a lot of stuff done. Depression is a lot like the weather. Okay, right now it's really sunny out. It's cold, but it's sunny out in Inver Grove Heights, and what the weather's like outside my window doesn't affect me right now necessarily, but it affects the lighting in my room and certain other things. But sometimes the weather is raining and snowing and it's freezing and there's drizzle. But I still have work to do. There are things that I can do every day to mitigate the effects of the weather on me. I can use an umbrella, I can wear boots, I can use sunscreen, depending on what the weather is. There are things that I can do to mitigate the weather's effect on me. Similarly, there are things that I need to do every day to mitigate the effect that depression has on me. And that's the best I can do at this point. Turning to substance use, this slide's been up there for a little bit. I'm sure you've read it already. Pay close attention to the right-hand column. When you're identifying an issue in a professional environment, all of these things not only are potentially tied to substance use issues, but to mental health issues as well. Substance use itself, isolation is a big trigger. And we didn't talk about triggers earlier in the presentation. A trigger is any stimulus or constellation of stimuli that together elicit a particular response from a person. As an example, I mentioned that I am a person in long-term recovery. On Saturday night, 2 nights ago, about 8:30 in the evening, night before Valentine's Day, I get a text from my ex-wife, and she's sending me a happy Valentine's Day, and then she sends me a YouTube video of a Cat Stevens song, "How Can I Tell You That I Love You?" And I've been divorced from my ex for 6 years. Just getting that, which had been up until Saturday night one of my favorite songs, just getting that from her within the context of our relationship, given that it was the night before Valentine's Day and I was going to have dinner on Valentine's Day with my new girlfriend, all of those things combined, that constellation of circumstances and stimuli within that context, served as a trigger that has started me on alcoholic cravings for the last 3 days that have been unlike any I've had in many months. I reached out to my friends and other people I know for support, my therapist on Monday. It's been all I can do to keep going. So how do we keep going? Not just in the midst of a craving like that, but within the pandemic itself. Well, part of what we do is we focus on recovery principles. And some of the principles that are important here are on the screen. And the 4 here, the first 4, I think are most important. The first one being live in today. Anxiety is something we're pulling from the future. We don't want to do that. Learn from the past, plan for the future, live in today. It's really what we have is right now. Be kind to yourself. Don't should yourself to death. Get adequate sleep, which sometimes can be very, very difficult when you're dealing with a mental health issue or with a substance use disorder. Getting adequate sleep can be very difficult. And what is absolutely essential is maintaining and establishing healthy human connections. And Joan will talk about that a little bit coming up next. Joan?
Thank you, Bob, and I always appreciate your willingness to be open and share this information, which is intended to say it's okay to ask for help. That if you looked at Bob and you said, "Oh, this is a guy who's wearing a nice suit or a nice jacket," we disagreed over what color it was. He thought it was brown. I thought it was purple. But it's like, what would you think of Bob? And then you heard some things about him, and Bob's still the same person. It's just that he has experienced some things in his life that any one of us might experience, and it's okay to ask for help. So we're going to talk a little bit about these biases we have it might be because of our anxiety where we act more rashly. It might be because we can't get to something, and so we prioritize in a way that doesn't have us using front of mind. And the impact of these biases can be greater on people from already underrepresented groups. And if you are someone who is wondering if you're going to get a second chance, if you're wondering if people are really paying attention to you, if they're noticing, if they're giving you the same benefit of the doubt, don't you think you're going to be more stressed? And so that's why it's so important to pay attention to this in our profession, because any kind of stress is a predictor for mental health. And so if you're adding bias as one of those stressors, you are adding a risk factor. And that's why we think it's so important to talk about it. So as you think about what expectations you might have, what presumptions you might be making, here are some things to think about. We can put this in the same context as if we're talking about, for example, racial bias or gender bias, where you will decide, yes, I'm going to be an ally. I'm going to be the person who interrupts. I'm going to be the person who does this. Well, what if it's about mental health? What if it's about somebody making fun of well-being efforts in our profession, which is really about helping us perform effectively under Rule 1.1 and being confident? So if somebody asking for help is seen as a weakness, how does our profession have a chance? I think that somebody asking for help is one of the strongest people out there. What are the times when you have reacted to something? Maybe it's because it's too close to home. So think of that language and what might you say. As we think about language, there's some things that we can pay attention to. The one I want to call attention to is substance abuse. That's what the DSM-4, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association 4, called it. And now it's substance use disorder, because as we have progressed in our society, we understand that you don't shame somebody by using a term like abuser when you're talking about a progressive and potentially fatal illness that anybody can get. And so think about some of your words. And if you're a person who's practicing law, for example, I know we've probably got quite a few law clerks and agency attorneys in this meeting, and I think that's wonderful. But if you're meeting with a client or a party and you use a term like substance abuse, that is demeaning. And so you can think about your language, even in those kinds of settings, in terms of how you relate to somebody. So when you have a reaction to something, what do you think? What comes to mind for you? And so you want to think about, like, I've made a decision. I'll give you an example. You're out on the road and you see a red Camaro. What decision do you make? You might get out of the way. You might decide to be competitive. That red Camaro has created a reaction in you because red Camaro said something to you. But if you saw a beige LeSabre, what would you do then? Would you get annoyed because that person's going to probably be in your way? Because you assume that that driver is slow and that sort of thing. So I want you to think about those red Camaro moments when you have that quick reaction to something. And that's a way that you can notice. You can find your own version of the red Camaro and say, oh, I just saw a red Camaro. And what decision am I making? What reaction am I having? What am I going to do as a result of the assumption I made? And if there are times when you're comfortable or uncomfortable communicating with someone, really think about that. Why is that? Am I the one who is causing the discomfort? And are you someone who people can give feedback to? As we move forward, and I want to remind people that we will welcome questions in the chat or comments, we want to move now to talking about some tools for building resilience. And these tools are also, by building resilience, we decrease our risk for things like anxiety. We decrease the strength of those triggers that might cause us to return to a behavior we once had. And we reduce our risk for a number of other things. It also affects our bias. So we'll talk about these resilience factors in the context of both increasing our well-being as well as decreasing our bias. So as we look at individual resilience factors, I want to note overall that when we're talking about stress and we're talking about triggers and we're talking about things that annoy us, if we keep adding them one on top of the other with no break, of course you're going to have a reaction. And that reaction might be that you get a letter from the lawyer's board because you avoided a client, Or it might be that you get a letter from the lawyer's board because you blew up within a situation. It could be the Judicial Standards Board. It could be all kinds of different places where you behaved in a way that had you been rested, had you thought about it, had you stepped back, you might not have. And so how do we change this from being one step over another? Well, we add in some stress mitigation activities. So it might mean a walk. It might mean stepping away. It might mean working on something else for a while if you find yourself being particularly stimulated in a negative way by something that you're working on. Okay, I just have to step away from it and do something else. Generally, resilience is going to benefit us in a number of ways, but I want to call attention to two of them. Number one, immunity. Wow, we're in a worldwide pandemic. Did you know that if you are using resilience strategies and practices in your life, that your immunity can actually be better? That's probably pretty important right now. And we have fewer risks for mental and physical illnesses, but then the other one that I think is critical is the last one, which is reduced perception of pain and threat. No, they're not only not out to get you, they're not even thinking about you, but we perceive it and we internalize it. And that isolation and uncertainty is one of the things that can be that can really put us at risk for mental health and substance use issues. So I want to talk about a few of these individually. I'll start with mindfulness. It's all over the place. You hear about mindfulness. It's important. There's articles, there's books, all right? So we're not going to give you a tutorial in mindfulness, except that it's active attention. Are you actually paying attention right now? And it might be little things. It might be something you do so you remember to turn off the light. It might be something you do so you can remember if you closed your garage door or not, if you're actually going anywhere. But I also want to point it out as something that might be a way to build a relationship or make a connection with someone, is to be aware of what their perception might be, okay? So for example, right now I'm looking at you, I'm doing this seminar. I have a second screen, so occasionally I'm checking the slide that's coming up next. I also have, I always do this, I have a printout of the PowerPoint on the desk. And while Bob was talking, I was reviewing some of the slides up ahead, which, you know, so looks like I'm not paying attention. Well, if you are interacting with somebody and they think you're looking down at your email on your phone or even playing a game, they're not going to think you're there for them. And so tell them, make a mindful choice to say, you will see me doing this and you will see me doing this. And if you were sitting across from me at a table, you would see the legal pad in front of me and the screen where I'm checking the stuff that we're talking about. I just wanted to make sure you knew that I'm paying full attention. So by establishing that attention, awareness, mindfulness, that can be something that can help you with that connection. Medium, you know, I don't know if it's small, medium, large really, but it's an easy way to divide it up. These are going to be things that are more intentional, where you take the time away to do something rather than having it so much occur. So that might be active meditation. It might be yoga. It might be doing a walking meditation, something like that. And then the bigger picture is being aware of your place in the world and taking the time to think about, am I doing what I mean to do here? And I can tell you that among the calls we have received since probably in the last year, starting at about a year ago, where I'm wondering if what I do every day is really making a difference, and I think I want to do something else. How do I do that? And so it might be a practice area, it might be a location. It's sort of like people realizing that life might be too short to keep doing some of the things they've been doing. There's some really interesting research. Professor Rhonda McGee is one of the biggest scholars in this area, that mindfulness and compassion practices allow us to pay much more attention to how we are reacting to a situation or an individual in the moment, and to really listen instead of jumping to a conclusion. And there's some work in the that the ABA has done around implicit bias, where they've looked at prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges and how that implicit bias can jump in ahead of things. So it's really important to us as lawyers to be aware of mindfulness as a tool to reduce that bias. The next resilience strategy I want to talk about is meaningfulness, which is and I kind of alluded to that earlier. Where are you finding the meaning in what you do? And it isn't that it might not be there, it's that you haven't had the ability to really take the time to think about it. So is what I'm doing fitting with my values? And if you feel engaged with your work, that's going to be an antidote to burnout. And so it's something to think about if you find yourself heading toward burnout. Wait a minute, I got to step back and figure out why this matters to me and pay attention to that. The person I talked to today who was better because I talked to them. All right. The next one I want to talk about is connections. And Bob talked about that a little bit earlier. Connections is where you are establishing a relationship with somebody where there's some trust there, where there's some communication. And when we touch somebody through, whether it can be petting a dog, it can be a handshake, with your family members, it can be a hug, you release a chemical called oxytocin, also known as the trust chemical. And it's something that helps us connect and feel like we have a common purpose, or we are, it gives us purpose, all right? Well, we don't have that touch right now in many cases. And so I want to remind you that you have 5 senses. And while you may be looking at the piece of paper in front of you to write down something that your client or the party just told you, by being active in that camera when they are saying something important, that is going to have the same result of releasing that oxytocin as if you had a chance to have a handshake ahead of time. That being there, that active listening. The next one I want to talk about is boundaries. This is a challenge because we don't have the same ways of relating to people, with our silos of work and home being put together like a not matching puzzle, okay? And so our boundaries may be challenged, and they're going to be different in professionally, with the people we serve, the people we work with, and in the rest of our life. And you look at those same pillars of well-being. Where might be different boundaries. You may be much more comfortable talking to someone about a topic as long as they're not too close into your space, that sort of thing, all right? You need to feel safe. And sometimes, when we go to the next slide, you need to really think about what are your limits for each category. And sometimes you need to say, I can't do that. And if it seems like common sense to know that somebody shouldn't have done something, well, they might be distressed too, and they're not really thinking about what they might be pushing. So you have to ask for it. And if you feel like someone has crossed a boundary, then think about, what did I do to allow that? Not that it's your fault, but what can I do next time? I also think perspective is critically important. And that's what I talked about earlier when we were saying that the situation is a 3 out of 10, but our reaction is an 8 out of 10. So here's an exercise that hopefully will be helpful to you. First, imagine the situation. And I'll use one that puts terror in the heart of every lawyer. You get a letter and the return address says Office of Lawyers Professional Responsibility, okay? So what's the worst that could happen? You're gonna find out that you missed all this other stuff and you've been suspended or even disbarred. Well, what must I do for that eventuality to happen? Well, absolutely nothing, because if you don't respond to those letters, you will be administratively suspended. What's the best that could happen? It's a summary dismissal. What can I do? Well, you can open the letter, in other words, do something, and then try to get to that best possible outcome. So the first version puts you in the passenger seat, maybe even the back seat with the child locks on. But the next version puts you in the driver's seat. And you are the one making the decisions. You get to drive this. So lawyers tend toward pessimism because we are always looking for the worst to happen, because that's what we get paid to do. So we can either recover for it or prevent it. And so it's harder for us to have that flexible optimism and move into a place where we can say, I am okay with making a decision in the positive direction. And also, there are a lot of things you can't control. You can't control the judge. You can't control the other party. You can't control your client or party, but you can control your best work. What is the best thing you can do to control your best work? And then I want to move into gratitude, which I think is an incredibly important part of our resilience. Bob, do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. Gratitude doesn't cost you anything, but the benefits that we get from gratitude are out of proportion to the effort we put into it. Gratitude is the birthplace of joy in our lives, and who here doesn't want more joy in your life? One of the best ways to do that is to develop an attitude of gratitude. They did a survey a number of years ago. They studied a group of people who had just won the lottery and compared it with a group of people who didn't. No surprise there, the people who just won were happier. The people who didn't, however, agreed to start a gratitude journal. And as time went on, you can see the blue line and the orange line there. At 3 months, they were about the same happiness on the measurement scale. And by 6 months, the people who were doing the gratitude journal were significantly happier as a group than the people who had won the lottery. And it didn't cost them anything at all. Some of the best gratitude practices are very, very simple. When my kids were young, we would ask them what their favorite part of the day was over dinner. You know, just something simple like that. You don't even have to use the phrase it as gratitude. What are you grateful for? It's what's the favorite part of today? What do you like about today? Another thing is to just do a simple gratitude journal. At night before you go to bed, write down 2 or 3 things that you're grateful for that happened that day. Joan?
Thanks, Bob. And then asking for help. We talked about that. Well, what happens when you do? The world doesn't end. Sometimes it's a really serious thing and you need to talk to somebody and you need significant help. But other times it's, I just need to talk this through with somebody. And LCL can help you with that. We help lawyers, judges, law students, and immediate family members. And if you have a staff member that needs help, we'll talk to them too. We don't have the same level of peer support that we have for lawyers. We're absolutely confidential. We're the most confidential program in the country, and we help with any issue that causes stress or distress. We work with people who are licensed to provide mental health services, and we also provide group support, which might be facilitated by one of our staff, or it might be facilitated by a counselor. We also try to get out into the profession and talk to people about these issues. So if you are part of an office or other organization where you'd say, yeah, I'd like an LCL CLE, we would love to come out and talk to you, and we have a lot of things on our website, which you've seen on the bottom of almost all of these slides, but it's easy to find where you can look that information up. We have some, we'll just put these here quickly. You can find all kinds of things on our website. We've even got some specific COVID-19 resources, and we partner with a group called the Sand Creek Group. Now, if you are a government employee, and I know many of you are, you may have an EAP through your employer. Well, a lot of them use the same counselor, so if you have 4 sessions through us and 3 sessions through them, you can double dip, and I really encourage you to take a look at that. EAPs are confidential in that they will report in aggregate. 7 people from this place contacted us last month, but your employer will never know, and you can use both. And you can also contact them directly without going through us. So, and this is our contact information. We want to be a resource for if you don't know who to ask, if you're wondering what the situation might be, if you would like a resource, we want to be here for you. We are free, we're confidential, we're paid for through your license fees, and we've been around for almost 45 years, and we have a reputation for providing good quality help and doing it in the most confidential and caring way. If you think it'll get better on its own, it probably won't, and we're here to help. Bob, do you have any final words?
I'd just like to thank everyone for their time and attention, and again, thank the Minnesota State Law Library for the opportunity to be with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you.